Welcome. And we'll start off with our bracha. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
So we are actually a little bit into Parshat Mattot at this particular point, and we dealt with the absolution of vows, and here we're moving on to the battle against the Midianites for what they had done to the Jewish people at the end of Parshat Balak. We had read about that, and here this is going to be. We're going to see that there's going to be a judgment against them, and that the Israelites are going to go into battle against them. So,
I wonder, Rabbi, what Moses' wife feels about that.
Well, good point. I don't think that I ever really thought about it quite like that. So you're right. I mean, that is actually brought up elsewhere. And part of the idea is that Jethro, of course, we read in another place that Jethro he converted essentially to belief in God. And I think that's sort of a very helpful explanation, that even though there are maybe, these statements that are made about destroying groups, etc., we have to keep in mind that they don't mention the exceptions, and they actually are exceptions. So I'll take it actually from the beginning of chapter 31, even though we touched on this last time around, and here we go. So, Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe lemor, Hashem spoke to Moses saying, Nakom nikmat b'nei Yisrael. So what he's saying is you should avenge the vengeance, literally, of the children of Israel, me'et ha-Midianim, from the Midianites. Achar te'asef alamecha, and after that you shall be gathered to your people. And what's clear is this connection, that this battle against the Midianites is connected to Moses's passing on and passing out of this world. So, give me a second here. And what we did was we did read this. We read about the fact that even the Moabites were involved in this. The Moabites were not included in this particular battle. And one of the reasons given has to do with the fact that Ruth, the Moabite, was such a righteous person, and another person called Naamah Ha'amonit, Naamah the Ammonite. So we actually were, as you can see from the notes here, we were looking at Torah Temimah on this. And last time we had started a Torah Temimah, but I hadn't finished it. And here's the Torah Temimah that we were looking at. Achar te'asef. So after this, you shall be gathered. God is telling Moses, right? Essentially, he's going to say, this battle, you take this battle, and then after that, you're going to die. So, Lohodia shivchan shel parnasei Yisrael. He says this is to inform us the praise, right, the greatness of the leaders of Israel. She'ein niftarim min haolam, because they do not pass away they don't leave this world, ad shehein nokmin nikmat Israel, until the point where they're able to avenge the wrongs done against the Jewish people. Shehi nikmat mi she'amar v'hayolam. And that is because when the Jewish people are assaulted, and essentially we're talking here about anti-Semitism, there's a connection here that in fact we're just standing in the place because we're the messenger, and they really are interested in destroying God. That's really what they're battling God, and that's the reason why this goes on. That the leaders of the people feel a responsibility to avenge the wrongs done to them. because those wrongs actually represent a hatred of the divine and of the creator of the world. So, Mishamar, the one who said, and the world came into existence. So, this is now, and this is taken from the Sifrei, the commentary on the book of Numbers and also the book of Deuteronomy. Tam Hadrasha. So the reason for this interpretation, Uma Shetala Mitat Moshe Benikmat Midian. The reason for this is because you see that the one that is the death of Moses to the avenging the Midianites. The Tam Hadavar and Bichlal, and in general, the reason for this particular matter, she'ro'in hanikama b'chayehem, that is to say that they need to see that this revenge is taken while they're still alive. U'al derech hakatuv, this parallels a statement that's made in the Bible, lo yishkav ad yochal taref. So this, I believe, actually is from a blessing that's given, that is to say, he shall not lie down until he has consumed prey. So lying down, of course, here means passing on, right? Eternal rest. And of course, consuming prey has to do with avenging the wrongs done against in this case, the Jewish people. And then it says, Yismach Tzadik Ki Chaza Nakam. So in Psalm 58, it says, the righteous person shall rejoice, for he has witnessed the avenging. He's seen, and essentially this is understood as an act of justice, that judgment has taken place against people who have committed terrible wrongs. So, kach nireh al derech hapshat, and that's how we would understand this in this most straightforward kind of way. Ach lefize, he says, however, there's a however, right? According to this, it's not really fully explained. Halashon, that is to say, the language of this particular statement, how it's expressed, isn't fully understood. In other words, the fact that it says to make known their greatness. In other words, if we understand it the way he's just explained it, where do we get necessarily that this is making known, right? This is informing us about their greatness. And it would have been more straightforward, halashon, had it expressed it, lehodia ma'alatan or gedulatan. In other words, there's another way of expressing this thought that makes more sense and is clearer, that is to make known their qualities and their greatness. In other words, how great they are considered, right? That they do this, that this happens for them. And for this reason, it appears, he says that this statement that he's quoted from the Sifrei actually is a shortened version of a longer version. V'tzarich lomar, and really and truly, one should make the statement, kamoshahu b'milu'o b'midrash Rabbah kan. He says there's another statement that parallels this in the Midrash Rabbah, right? Another source that is stated in full, that's more fully stated. And that is, L'hodia shivcho shel Moshe. That is to let us know how great Moses was. Ilu haya rotze lechyot od kama shanim. Had he desired to live a number of years more, longer than he actually lived? Had he wanted to live longer, hayachai, he would have been able to live longer. Why? Sharei HaKadosh Baruch Hu Amarlo, because basically the Holy One, blessed be He, said to him, Nakom, okay, V'achar te'asef. He says, once you've done that, then you shall be gathered. Tala, so he made the one mitatan benikmat Midian. Okay, so he in other words he made the death of Moses dependent on the avenging of the Midianites. And if Moses had wanted to delay that, he would have lived longer. He's being told, once you get that done, then you're going to die. And if Moses had wanted to live longer, he could have done that. Ritzono lamar. So in other words, he could have delayed this action of avenging the Midianites, and automatically he would have been certain to live longer. Ela amar Moshe, but Moses thought, right? V'chi bishvil she'achaye titakev nikmat Yisrael. So Moses was saying to himself, I should delay this act to avenge the Israelites so that I can personally live a longer life. Miyad, and so immediately we read how he says, Vaydaber Moshe Elaham behechaltzu v'gomer. And we read right after that, it says, Moses said to the people, muster yourselves, gather together, separate off these people, etc. In other words, the job, adkan, and this is the point. And if we look at it like this, then in fact it's telling us something great about Moses. What a great person he was, that he was willing to sacrifice his life, the length of his life, in order to take care of the judgment that Israel deserved. And according to this, halashon va'inyan mevu'ar. And in this way, we understand what's being stated and the whole point that's being made. It becomes clarified. So that's how we get a little taste again of how Baruch Halevi Epstein explains things. So now we get back into the actual text itself. So here it says, Vadaber Moshe el ha'am, just as we just read. Moses spoke to the people, Lemor, saying, Heichaltzu, in other words, separate off me'itchem, from yourselves, anashim letzava, men to serve in the army. Vayu al Midian, and they will fight against the Midianites, latet nikmat Hashem. Interesting, right? To avenge God, Hashem, the Midian, against the Midianites. So let's see what Rashi has to tell us here. Vaydaber Moshe. Okay, so here we go. Rashi actually is also referencing the Sifrei that we just read. Afal pi sheshama shemitato tluya badavar. Even though he understood, right? Shema, understand? Shemitato, that his own death, tluya badavar, was dependent on this matter. Asa b'simcha. Rashi says he did it happily. He was happy to do it. The lo icher, and he didn't delay it. So we see how Rashi says very similar ideas that we read in the Torah Temimah. Heichaltzu, right? So this word heichaltzu, and I looked the word chalatz, and it actually means to separate off, right? So there's that act of chalitza, and that refers to the situation where the woman removes the sandal of the man who does not want to perform yibum, right? So in other words, it means to separate off. Rashi says ketargumo, right? We're familiar now when Rashi occasionally says we should look at the Aramaic translation. Lashon chilutze sava mezuyanim. So he gives us somewhat of a different interpretation. So We also have, it's certainly a term that was used much more frequently many years ago, the term chalutzim. Some of you, I'm sure, are familiar. It's exactly the same word. And we understood the word chalutzim as meaning pioneers. But chalutzei tzava means, I think it still means, people who have been separated to serve in the army, mezuyanim, and it means armed. Mezuyanim would be armed individuals, that these armed individuals are separated off to serve in the army. Anashim. So this word anashim, which we generally use in the Hebrew to mean people, right? Just simply meaning people or men. Very often in biblical interpretation, in rabbinic biblical interpretation, the word anashim, because it doesn't always have to be used, right? In other words, I believe that, here we go. It could have just, look at this. Here's the sentence. Hechaltzu me'itchem anashim latzava. Separate off for service from yourselves, latzava, right? For the army. That would be understood. You don't need the word anashim in this sentence for its basic meaning, right? It could mean hechaltzu meitchem latzava. Separate, and it would be understood to mean people to serve in the army. So anashim, what's the purpose? So what's it trying to emphasize? The understanding is anashim tzadikim, that they are righteous people. And that's sort of an interesting thought, right? That people who are empowered in this way, when you empower people like this, in this particular way, one needs to make sure they're righteous people. And he gives an example, v'chein, and similarly, Shemot Yud Zayin in Exodus chapter 17, Bechor lanu anashim, where it says, choose for us, and then again, it uses this term, anashim. In other words, worthy people. Another example, v'chein, and likewise in Deuteronomy, Dvarim, Aleph, Deuteronomy chapter 1, anashim. It uses the anashim. Worthy people understood. Chachamim, wise, v'yiduim, and knowledgeable. Nikmat Hashem, right? The judgment of God, right? Or the avenging of God. Sheha'omed keneged Yisrael, and again, stated very clearly, one who stands against Israel. Ke'ilu omed keneged HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's as if they are standing against the Holy One, blessed be He. Now, basically, I understand this. Obviously, it's saying that there's a special relationship between God and the Jewish people. But you can be a Jewish person in name. It doesn't mean that you're a Jewish person in deed. And you might not even be a Jewish person, but you still can be a Jewish person in deed. A little bit more difficult in some ways, but maybe not, depending on what we understand, how we understand what it is to be an Israelite, a child of Israel. And that is to have this belief. Essentially, I would say you would be following the 10 Commandments, right? And everything else starts to become a blessing that we have these particular choices to make. If we understand the mitzvot, the commandments, to be actually a privilege instead of a burden. And as I've sort of thought about these things more, the fact is that David, I'll recognize you in just 1 second, to understand that the mitzvot are actually a putting into practice, obviously, and a divine connection. That having this concept of mitzvot, where we're saying that the reason that we're doing these particular things is because we are divinely commanded to do that, puts an amazing level of significance onto these acts, some simple, some more complex, but knowing that it has to do with what you do is so important. And that statement, Asher Kitshanu b'mitzvotav, right? Who sanctified us through his commandments, is exactly saying this particular point. In other words, if we understand sanctified as meaning made significant, giving our lives significance through these commandments, it puts a whole different tone and color onto the idea of being in service to God. David, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, so for someone as a Jewish person indeed who's not a Jewish person, so would that be somebody, you've used this example before, but like Mother Teresa, is that what you're thinking of? I mean, that's an extreme example, but
it is an extreme example. I know.
But is that what you're thinking of?
That is what I'm thinking. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And of course, there is a statement that says, Tzadikei umot ha'olam yesh lahem chelek ba'olam haba. It says the righteous of the nations have a portion in the world to come. That's actually in our statements. So it's, we understand the direction that the Torah has given us as an incredible privilege. But I would say, of course, that other people have their Torahs as well that also lead them in similar directions. But there is something incredibly profound about this notion of mitzvot that I don't think we always appreciate.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks. Thank you for raising the issue and clarification. Need to see what's going on here. For some reason, there we go. Okay. Sorry. Just making some, okay. All right. All right. I'll find out where that note goes in a moment. I'm so sorry. All right. I think we are at the end. Yep, at the end of that Rashi. So, Dalet, Elef Lamate, 1,000 per tribe. Elef Lamate, 1,000. In other words, from each tribe. Elef Lamate, Elef Lamate. L'chol Mattot Yisrael, for all the tribes of Israel. And again, this l'chol, right, since this has basically been stated here, what does this l'chol for all come to say? What does it add to our understanding of the meaning of this verse? Tishlechu, you shall send forth latzava in the army, right? To do service. And of course, even in English, we sometimes talk about the service, meaning military service. It definitely is. It calls on a person to serve. Okay. So he says, here go. Rashi picks this up right away. L'chol matot Yisrael, for all the tribes of Israel. And the fact that it makes such an emphasis of this, he quotes the Sifrei that says, L'rabot, to include Shevet Levi, the tribe of Levi. Because let's be honest about it, when it talks about the tribes, we know that Levi, the tribe of Levi, was distinguished and not included. And so that's why there is that emphasis here. Let's go on. Vayimasru me'alfei Yisrael, and they delivered from the thousands of Israelites, Elef Lamate, 1,000 per tribe, Shneim Asar Elef. So interesting, it says 12,000 Chalutzei Tzava, who were to separate for service, who were designated, right, for service. So it's interesting because if we include the tribe of Levi, how many tribes do we wind up having? Is 13. So this has to somehow or other, and I don't believe it's explained here, but nevertheless, Levi is included in some sense or another. So whether it means that the Levites weren't necessarily 1,000, but that the 1,000 had to do with the other 12 tribes, but that Levi was also included in terms of having to serve in this particular regard. And that's about the best I can do at this point. So, going into here. Vayimasru, right? They were delivered, right? Lohodiacha. So this is to tell you, Shivchan shel ro'ei Yisrael, right? To know this is the praise of the shepherds of Israel. Kama hem chavivim al Yisrael. How beloved they are to Israel, right? So here we go. In other words, that at the bottom line is that the Israelites appreciate, deeply love their leaders. I believe that's what they're saying. Ad shelo shamu b'mitato, up until the time that they heard about Moses's passing. In other words, they also heard that once this was done, Moses was going to have to pass on. Mahu Omer, what does it say? Od ma'at uskaluni, until this moment, they, in a moment, they will stone me. Umi shishamu shemitat Moshe tluya b'miknat Midian. But once the Israelites heard that Moses' death was dependent on the avenging of Midian, lo ratzu lalechet, that in fact they didn't want to set off and go to do this. Ad shenimseru al kocham, until, so in other words, the point of this umasru, until they were delivered against their will. They were forced to do this, is how Rashi's understanding this. And in other words, that this word nimsaru is to tell you how unwilling the Israelites were to do this if Moses were to die. So on the one hand, right, on the one hand, we read how they're treating him, right? And on the other hand, when they realize they're not going to have him anymore, then they have a very different feeling about things. So next sentence. Vayishlach otam Moshe, and Moses sent them elef lamatet l'tzava. So look at this, the way this is being said so many different times, right? 1,000 per tribe to serve. Otam, they, ve'ed Pinchas ben Elazar, and Pinchas, son of Elazar, HaKohen, the priest, latzava, to serve. Uchlei HaKodesh, and the holy vessels, the chatzotzrot, and the trumpets, tru'ah, the trumpets, the sounding trumpets, bi'ado, were in his possession. They were in Pinchas's possession. And we are going to stop right here with the Rashi. Okay, yeah, here we go. This is where this would be going. Here, I'm going to put in the little arrow. All right, I guess I'll have to do this. I'll do this later. Thank you. All right, never mind. I'm going to stop the share. And we can stop the recording.